Her family was drowning in debt. The crown demanded payment, and the price was her. Mara wasn't asked to marry the Alpha King. She was delivered to him. A man who didn't speak, didn't move, didn't know she existed. An Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the 7 packs, lying in a coma for 9 months. She could have cried, could have run. Instead, she leaned forward and kissed his forehead, and his eyes opened. The kingdom of Veldrath sat between 3 mountain ranges and a sea that never fully froze. A land where pack law was older than memory, and alphas ruled not just with strength, but with bond scent, with blood rights, and with the ancient hierarchy that divided every soul at birth into Alpha, Beta, or Omega. Mara Voss was 22 years old and an Omega. Dark auburn hair, eyes the color of winter storms, hands that had grown rough from years of keeping her family's crumbling estate from falling further into ruin. She was kneeling in the great hall of her family's home when her father entered. Lord Aldrich Voss had once been a man of standing, a Beta Lord with timber rights and a name that opened doors across Veldrath. But bad investments and worse luck had stripped him to the bone. The letters from the Crown Treasury had been arriving for months. The servants had disappeared one by one. The hearth burned low because they couldn't afford more wood. Mara? Just her name. No preamble. She already knew. Had known for weeks, really. The Crown's envoy arrived this morning, her father said. His throat worked. They've agreed to absorb the debt. Every coin of it. In exchange for... He couldn't finish. Her mother, Elsa, stood by the window with her hand pressed to her mouth. Her younger brother, Finn, barely 16, stared at the floor, fists clenched. In exchange for me, Mara finished for him. Calm, flat, final. Alpha King Caius Dawnmere. He's been indisposed for 9 months. The physicians say his body lives, but his wolf has gone somewhere they cannot reach. He doesn't wake. Mara blinked once, slow. You want me to bond marry a man in a coma? Not a question, a statement of her own fate. The crown needs a bonded queen, Aldrich whispered, even if he never wakes. An Omega queen legitimizes the line. It stabilizes the packs. The High Council insists. And if he never wakes? Her father looked away. The answer lived in the silence between them like something rotting. Mara looked at her mother, crying silently. At Finn, whose jaw was locked so tight it trembled. At her father, who had broken completely under the weight of what he'd agreed to give away. She could have screamed, could have refused, could have run into the frozen mountain roads and disappeared into the wild packs of the north. She did none of those things. Mara Voss stood slowly, smoothed her dress, and looked her father in the eye until he was the one who looked away. When do they come for me? Tomorrow, dawn. She nodded once, walked upstairs, closed the door, and allowed herself exactly 3 minutes to cry. Because Mara had learned young that tears changed nothing. They didn't erase debts. They didn't wake sleeping kings. But she didn't know yet, standing in that cold room in the depth of Veldrath's worst winter, that there was one thing in all the 7 packs capable of waking the most powerful alpha alive. And that thing was her. Act 2, the palace and the sleeping king. The crown carriage arrived as the sun broke over the mountain peaks, turning the frost-covered valley into something almost forgivable. Mara packed nothing. What was the point? Everything she owned would be replaced with garments befitting her new title. Her old life would be erased like smoke. Finn held her at the door. I'll find a way to get you out, he whispered. I promise. Don't, she said softly. Don't make promises you can't keep. Just study hard. Make something of yourself. That's enough. Her mother couldn't look at her. The guilt was too heavy. Her father stood like a man already grieving a daughter who wasn't dead yet. The carriage was black with silver wolf heads on the doors. 6 gray horses. 2 crown guard who looked straight ahead and saw nothing. Mara climbed in without looking back. If she looked back, she wouldn't be able to leave. Veldrath Palace rose before her like a monument to pack dominance itself, ancient stone and iron and centuries of alpha rule. Wolf banners in silver and black snapped in the cold wind, guards in full plate, walls that had never once fallen in 600 years of siege and storm. The head of household, Lady Crane, met her in the entrance hall, a beta woman of perhaps 60, with iron-gray hair and eyes that assessed Mara the way one might assess livestock at market. "You're younger than the last one," Lady Crane said. No warmth, no cruelty, just observation. "The last one? The third, actually." She began walking, her heels ringing on stone. Mara followed. The first fainted when she scented him. The alpha bond pull even from a comatose king is powerful for an Omega. The second lasted 2 weeks before she begged release. The third made it nearly a month before the isolation broke her. They all failed to understand the reality of the situation. Each word was a small violence, precisely placed. You are not here to be loved. You are not here to be a wife in any real sense. You are here to be a symbol, to stand beside a king who may never wake, to legitimize the line, to carry the pack bond forward, by whatever means the Crown Council deems necessary. The words hung in the corridor like poison. They walked through halls hung with the banners of all 7 packs: Stormspire, Ironhold, the Ashwood Clan, Duskfen, the Twin Peaks Alliance, Coldwater, and the Dawnmere line itself, silver wolves on black. Past rooms with ceilings so high they seemed built for gods. Past servants who looked at Mara with pity, or curiosity, or nothing at all. "You'll meet him tonight," Lady Crane said, stopping before a heavy ironwood door banded with silver. "The bond ceremony will be performed tomorrow, whether he is conscious or not. After that, you are bound. Legally. By pack law. Irrevocably." She paused. Something almost human crossed her face for half a second. "I suggest you prepare yourself." Then she was gone. It and Mara stood alone in a chamber larger than her family's entire hall, with a window overlooking the palace wolf runs and a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. Night fell over Veldrath Palace like a stone dropping into deep water. Silent maids dressed Mara in ceremonial white, the color of first bond Omegas, with silver thread along the collar that marked her as crown-claimed. Her hair was braided in the old Dawnmere style, 2 strands twisted with black ribbon. Jewelry she'd never earned was clasped at her throat, cold and heavy as a declaration. Lady Crane came for her at midnight. Why now? Because the king's condition is most stable after the moon rises. Because the pack physicians have completed their evening assessment. Yes, because waiting until morning gives you too much time to lose your nerve. They walked through sleeping corridors lit by iron torch brackets, past tapestries of ancient pack wars, past doors that were always closed. Mara's heart beat faster with each turn. 2 King's Guards stood outside the royal chambers. They opened the doors without a word. The room beyond was vast and dim. Beeswax candles burned in silver stands, casting warm light over stone walls hung with deep green tapestry. A hearth large enough to stand in crackled with fire that somehow did nothing for the cold that had settled into Mara's bones. And in the center of it all, in a great 4-post bed, hung with black velvet curtains embroidered with silver wolves, lay a man. Mara moved closer on silent feet. Alpha King Caius Dawnmere was perhaps 33. Dark hair swept back from a face all strong lines and sharp angles, a face built for command, even in this unnatural suspended sleep. His jaw was set, his shoulders broad even against the pillows. His hands lay open on the coverlet, large and still. There was something profoundly, deeply wrong about seeing so much raw alpha power rendered so completely helpless. Mara stood beside the bed for a long moment, just looking at him. This stranger? This king? This man she was meant to bond marry tomorrow? The scent hit her then, cedar and dark amber and something older. Something that resonated in the Omega part of her that she'd spent her whole life trying to keep quiet. Even unconscious, even absent from his own body, his alpha scent was the most powerful thing she had ever breathed. "So you're the one who has half the 7 packs terrified," she whispered. "Even like this." She studied his face, the straight nose, the dark lashes resting against his cheeks, the slight scar above his left brow that suggested he hadn't always been the one who walked away from a fight. Someone had shaved him this morning, maintaining the fiction that he might wake any moment. On impulse, or something deeper than impulse, something she couldn't name and wouldn't have been able to explain. Mara sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped slightly. One of the candles guttered and recovered. She didn't know what made her do what she did next. Maybe it was defiance. Maybe it was grief for the life she would never have. Maybe it was simple human kindness for a man trapped somewhere between this world and whatever lay past it. Yakshi leaned forward slowly, one hand bracing on the pillow beside his head, close enough to see the faint silver threading through his dark hair at the temple, close enough to smell cedar and amber and old power, close enough to feel the warmth of his breath. And then Mara Voss, daughter of a disgraced lord, payment for her family's debts, the 4th Omega sent to a king everyone had already accepted, was gone, closed her eyes and pressed her lips gently to his forehead. It wasn't a kiss of passion. It was the kind you give to something precious and broken. The kind that says, "I'm sorry this happened to you. I see you. You're not alone." She held it for 2 heartbeats. 3. Then she pulled back, opened her eyes, and found herself staring into eyes the color of dark amber. Wide, confused, awake. The world stopped. Every sound vanished. Every thought dissolved. There was only those eyes. Burning amber, the color of pack fire, looking at her with the slow, surfacing awareness of someone rising from the bottom of a very deep lake. His lips parted. His voice came out rough, cracked, unused for 9 months, scraping against his throat like a blade against a whetstone. "Who?" He blinked, tried to focus, tried to understand why there was a woman sitting on his bed in the middle of the night, wearing first bond white, and looking at him like he was a ghost she hadn't expected to answer back. "Who are you?" Mara's heart slammed against her ribs so hard she thought it might break through. "Mara," she managed, I'm meant to be your bonded queen." Something moved through his expression. Confusion clearing, sharp intelligence surfacing like a blade from water. Those amber eyes swept over her face, her white dress, the candles burning around them. Then, slowly, so slowly she almost didn't see it happen, his hand moved, crossed the space between them, found hers where it rested on the coverlet. His fingers closed around hers. Warm, real, alive. "Mara," he repeated, testing the name, claiming it. Outside the door, one of the King's Guard heard a voice that had been silent for 9 months. He went perfectly still, turned to his companion. Neither spoke, but they both understood. The king was awake. Within minutes, the palace would erupt. Pack physicians would come running. High council members would be roused from their chambers. Messengers would ride through the night to all 7 pack territories. But in that moment, in that sacred, yes, impossible space between miracle and discovery, there were only 2 people in a candlelit room. A woman who had been given as payment, and a king who had returned from somewhere no one thought he'd ever leave. His hand still held hers. His eyes never left her face. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. "I kissed your forehead," she said. Honest, even though honesty might be dangerous. His thumb moved across her knuckles. Once, gentle. "Then I suppose," he said, his voice gathering strength with every word, "that I owe you my life." Act 3, the bonding and the truth. The bond ceremony happened 3 days later, and this time the king was awake. Veldrath went to its knees. Pack messengers rode day and night. The great wolves of all 7 territories howled at the moon in celebration. The sound rolling across the mountain passes, and down into the valleys like thunder that didn't stop. Mara stood beside Caius in the great hall of Veldrath Palace, dressed now in silver and black, the Dawnmere colors, with wolf lilies woven into her hair, and spoke the bond vows she'd never imagined she would mean. Blood to blood, breath to breath, pack to pack. What I am, I give. What I protect with you. When the pack elder pronounced them bonded, when Caius turned to her and lifted her veil, she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Recognition. As if he'd been searching for her in the dark for 9 months, and had only just now found what he'd been looking for. The bond kiss he gave her then wasn't ceremonial. It was a promise. In the weeks that followed, Mara learned the palace. Not just the rooms and the wolf runs and the hierarchy of the 7 packs, but the invisible grammar of power. The alliances made in whispers during meal halls. The enemies who bowed deepest and smiled widest. The servants who reported to people who shouldn't be watching. And she learned Caius. He was nothing like she'd expected. Sharp, yes. Commanding, absolutely. The most dominant alpha presence she'd ever been near, and she felt it in her bones every time he walked into a room, but also unexpectedly patient. He asked her opinion on pack disputes. He listened when she spoke, really listened, in a way that no one had since Finn was small and thought she knew everything. He walked with her on the wolf runs at dawn before the rest of the palace woke. "Why me?" she asked one morning, frost still on the grass, such their breath visible in the cold air. "You could have refused the bond after you woke. Sent me back. Why didn't you?" Caius was quiet for a long moment. "Do you know what it's like?" he said carefully. "Being trapped in your own mind? Aware but unable to move, or speak, or open your eyes. Able to hear everything, and unable to respond to any of it?" She shook her head. "I heard the physicians say I'd never wake. I heard the High Council discuss regency as if I were already in the ground. The first 3 Omegas they sent, I heard their fear, their disgust, their counting of days until they could leave." He paused. "And then I heard you." Mara's breath caught. "You sat beside me and you spoke to me like I was a person. Not a king, not a political problem. A person." His hand found hers, the bond warmth humming between their palms the way it always did now. "And then you kissed my forehead, like you actually cared whether I was suffering." He turned to face her fully. "You didn't wake me, Mara. You called me back. There's a difference." Her eyes burned. "I didn't know you could hear. I heard everything." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. "Including the moment you told me you were meant to be my bonded queen. And even in that darkness, I remember thinking, good." Act 4, The Poison in the Palace. But Veldrath Palace was never a place for simple happiness. Mara began noticing things. The way High Counselor Breskin watched her during the pack feast days with cold, calculating eyes that didn't match his smiling mouth. The conversations that stopped when she turned a corner. With the pack physician who had attended Caius during his coma, a man named Dr. Aldrin, who looked at her not with curiosity, but with something close to fear. One afternoon, a young palace servant named Wren found her alone in the herb garden. Barely 18. Frightened eyes. She glanced in every direction before she spoke. "Your Grace, I need to tell you something. About the king's illness." Ice moved down Mara's spine. "What about it?" "It wasn't a natural sickness." The ice reached her feet. "Say that again." "I cleaned Counselor Breskin's study. 3 weeks ago I found documents hidden in the false bottom of his correspondence chest. Letters between him and Dr. Aldrin. Payment records." Wren's hands twisted together. "For something called Moonshade Draft. It's a slow suppressant. It doesn't kill, but it traps the wolf inside. It keeps the alpha bond dormant. Like a waking death." Mara set down the herbs she'd been holding. Very carefully. Very slowly. "They kept him under deliberately," she said. "Yes, Your Grace, while Breskin governed as interim voice of the crown. While the pack territories started drifting toward his influence." Wren's voice dropped to almost nothing. "And now that you've woken him, now that the king is asking questions they don't want to answer." She didn't finish. She didn't have to. They'll try again, Mara said quietly. Ren nodded. I thought you should know. You seem like you actually care about him. That night, Mara told Caius everything. His study, the fire crackling, the palace sleeping around them. His face went very still as she spoke. His hands tightened on the arms of his chair with the deliberate control of an alpha, keeping his wolf from the surface. Breskin, he said when she finished. My own High Counselor. We need proof before you move against him, Mara said. An alpha king who acts without evidence looks unstable. The Pack Lords won't follow unstable. He looked at her. How do you know that? My father lost everything because he trusted the wrong people. I watched it happen. I learned. She leaned forward. Let me help you. It's dangerous. I was sold to bond marry a comatose king. She met his eyes steadily. I think I can manage dangerous. Something fierce and proud moved through his expression. Something she was beginning to recognize as the way Caius Dawnmere looked at things he considered irreplaceable. You're remarkable. I'm practical, she corrected. There's a difference. They planned carefully over the following 3 weeks. Mara played the role of naive young queen perfectly, attending Pack audience days, smiling at ceremonies, asking no questions that would make anyone nervous. Speaking of flowers and Pack traditions, and the adjustment to palace life. In the evenings, behind locked doors, she and Caius went through records, ledgers, Pack territory correspondence, following the thread of Breskin's long, patient betrayal. She slept with a locked door and a blade under her pillow. 3 weeks. Then they had everything they needed. The reckoning came during the High Council Assembly. All 7 Pack representatives, the elder bond keepers, the Crown Guard in full regalia, the great wolf banners hanging still in the hall. Caius stood before them all, and Mara stood at his side, not behind him, beside him, as bonded queens stood in the old Pack law, and laid out the evidence piece by piece, her voice steady as mountain stone. Breskin's face moved through red to white to gray. You have nothing but the word of a servant girl, he said, and the suspicions of an Omega who doesn't understand palace politics. I have 14 separate payments from your private treasury accounts to Dr. Aldrin, Caius said, his voice dropping to the register that silenced rooms. I have letters in your own hand ordering the continued administration of Moonshade Draft. I have testimony from 3 palace staff who saw you meet with Aldrin in the locked lower courtyard on nights when my physicians reported my condition had worsened unexpectedly. He leaned forward. Well, and I have you in this hall, lying to your king. The king's guard moved. Breskin was escorted out, still protesting, his voice fading down the corridor like something that had already ceased to matter. In the silence that followed, Caius looked around the council table, at every face, every calculation, every loyalty being quietly recalculated in real time. Does anyone else have objections to my bonded queen? No one spoke. Asked 5. The choice. Later, on the high balcony overlooking the palace wolf runs, the valley spread below them in silver moonlight, Caius found Mara. You could have stayed silent, he said. Let me walk into whatever Breskin was planning. Watched from safety. No, she said simply. I couldn't have. Why not? She turned to face him. The wind was cold, but she didn't feel it anymore, and not since the bond had taken. There was always warmth now, where his presence touched the edges of her wolf sense. Because you're mine to protect, she said. The same way I'm yours. That's what bond marriage means in the old Pack law. Not crowns, not politics, not territory rights. She held his gaze, just choosing each other when it would be easier not to. Caius looked at her for a long, still moment. Then he smiled, really smiled, the kind that broke through the Alpha Command face entirely and made him look like a man rather than a king. I was in the dark for 9 months, he said. Do you know what I remember most clearly from that darkness? Not the fear, not the frustration. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with a gentleness that didn't match his size at all. The moment your lips touched my forehead, and something in me that had been frozen cracked open. He pulled her close, and she let herself be pulled. I would go through it all again, he murmured, if it meant finding you at the end. Don't, she said against his chest. Don't ever do that to me again. Then stay with me. Always. I'm not going anywhere. And she meant it. Not as duty, not as bond obligation, as choice. Epilogue. 1 year later, 1 year after the bond ceremony, Mara stood on the high wolf run of Veldrath Palace and watched the sunrise paint the 7 mountain ranges gold. She walked differently now, not with the careful, invisible posture of an Omega trying not to take up space, but with the ease of a woman who had claimed her place rather than had it assigned. Her family's debts had been cleared on the morning of the bond ceremony. Her father had found work that suited who he actually was, rather than the man he'd been pretending to be. Finn was in training with the Crown Scouts, exactly where he'd always wanted to be. Her mother had stopped crying. The palace had changed too. Mara had seen to it. Servants had better quarters and fair wages. Dr. Aldrin was in the Crown prison. Breskin's web of influence was being unraveled thread by thread, and Wren, the young maid who had risked everything to warn her, was now Mara's personal attendant, trusted and protected. She found Caius where she always found him in the mornings. In his study, the morning light across the great wolf territory maps spread on his table, working through the endless work of governing 7 packs. He looked up when she entered. His face did the thing it only did for her. "Come here," he said. She crossed to him. Let him draw her into his side. Let herself be held by this man who had been a stranger, then a duty, then something else entirely. Something she still didn't have a word for in any of the 7 pack languages, but felt in every breath. "I had a strange dream last night," he murmured into her hair. "I was lost in the dark, and someone came and brought me back. That wasn't a dream." "I know." He pulled back to look at her, amber eyes warm. "I think about what would have happened if they'd sent someone different, if you'd been too afraid to stay, if you hadn't kissed me that night." Mara touched his face. "But I did." "Why? You could have refused, could have let me sleep." She'd never told him this part, had never found the right words. "I looked at you," she said quietly, "and I saw someone who needed to be found. Well, that was all. Nothing noble, nothing planned." She held his gaze. "I saw you, and I couldn't leave you there alone." His arms tightened around her. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that moment." "I won't," she said. "I already know I won't." Because Mara had arrived at Veldrath Palace as payment for a debt she didn't owe, she'd bonded to a comatose king because she had no choice. But somewhere between that first impossible night and this morning 1 year later, she'd made the most important choice of all. She'd chosen to love him, and he'd chosen to love her back. That wasn't fate. That wasn't pack law. That wasn't bond obligation, or alpha dominance, or omega instinct. That was something rarer than any of those things. That was real.